what we have in this example is ages of 30 people. So the variable here is age. Age is in years. And the number of people in this sample is 30. That is, sample size equals 30. The letter that is used for sample size in statistics is usually N, and that's what we'll use throughout this course. So N equals 30. Now, what exactly is a stem and leaf plot? It's a way of representing the data and it is not exactly a graph, but you're going to see that it plays the role of a graph. So when we examine the numbers here, we have two-digit numbers starting with a 1 or a 2 or a 3, 4, 5 or 6. 66 is the largest number and 12 is the smallest number. So we know that the numbers either start with a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. So we first list the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So we first list that. And then we go through the list of ages here starting with the first one, which is 12. So 12 is 1, 2. So the first row is all the numbers, two-digit numbers that start with a 1. So 1 along with the 2 forms a 12. So we enter the number 2 in the first row starting with a 1. The second number is 20. So it's a number starting with 2. So 2 along with a 0 is 20. So we put the 0 in the second row. So we don't write down the 2 because that's a number that would be common to all the numbers in the second row. The third number is a 42. So 42 starts with a 4, so it's going to go into this row, and that's what you see here. 4 along with the 2 forms a 42. So we go through each of the numbers in this data set one after another, and then write down the numbers in the rows that they belong. If it is a 61, for example, it goes into the last row. We already have a 6, which is called the stem. We just enter the number 1. So that 6 and the 1 make 61. So this is called a stem and leaf plot. This is called the key. So when someone looks at your stem and leaf plot, you don't want them to be confused about what exactly the plot means. So just put a little example which shows a stem and a leaf. 1 is the stem, the leaf is 2, so separate the 2 with a vertical line. So 1 with a vertical line in between and a 2 is really equal to 12. So the number here, for example, represents 3 and the 1, which is 31. Now, a stem and leaf plot is very useful in the sense that it almost plays the role of a histogram. So if you look at it, you can see it almost looks like a histogram that sits sideways. So if we want to find the shape of this distribution, we can think of it just roughly as this. Now when we collect data in the real world, we're never going to get a perfectly symmetrical bell-shaped distribution. But if it looks something like this, you could call it roughly bell-shaped. A stem and leaf plot is easy to construct by hand. However, you can use Crunch It again from Launchpad to construct a stem and leaf plot, just follow the instructions here, and it's quite easy to understand. All you have to do is go to graphics, use the select the stem and leaf graph, and then in the pop-up dialog box you can enter the title, select the data set, and the maximum number of rows for each stem is 1, because here notice that if 1 is the stem, we have 2, 4, 5, and 7 all sitting in the same row. Now we can also split the stems, and we're going to see that in the next example. So if we had to split the stem, we'd have 2 rows of numbers starting with 1. We'd have all numbers from 0 through 4 in the first row. So in this case, we'll have the 2 and the 4 in the first row, and then the 5 and the 7, so anything that goes from 5 through 9 in the second row. So this is called splitting of stems, and we'll see this in the next example. Now for the same example, if we had to split the stems, notice that we have 2 rows starting with 1. So there are 2 there's the same branch 1, but we've split it into 2 rows. There are 2 rows starting with 2, 2 rows starting with 3, and so on. So this is your stem and leaf plot, except that here we have split the stems. Now when you use Crunch It, if you want to split the stems, in the pop-up dialog box where you enter the title and select the data set and so on, this is important to do. Maximum number of rows for stem equals 2. Basically you've split the stem into 2 parts. You can also split it into 3, but most of the data sets we are going to study are quite small, so splitting it into 2 should be good. Now for the same example, if we are studying the shape of the distribution again, notice that this looks more symmetrical than what we saw in the previous example where we just used 1 stem. Now a histogram, if you recall, it looks like this. And the stem and leaf plot can be used to represent quantitative variables. In both cases, we're able to figure out the shape of the distribution. So both the graphs can be used in the case of quantitative variables, but the main advantage of a stem and leaf plot is that we do not lose any of the details that we have from the raw data set, as in the case of a histogram where the details are lost. So for example, if we look at, we've seen this example before. We're looking at the age group of moms 15 through 19. There are 4 moms in the age group of 15 through 19. So that's pretty clear. There are 4 moms that fall into this age group, but it's not very clear exactly what the ages of the 4 moms are. However, in a stem and leaf plot, the same numbers can be represented with a stem, which is 1, and the leaves that are 5, 6, 7, and 9. Notice that it's clear that there are 4 people in this age group, and in addition to that, we know exactly how old they are. One is 15, one is 16, one is 17, and one is 19. So we haven't lost any details when we construct a stem and leaf plot. That is the advantage of a stem and leaf plot over the histogram. Now this table shows the variation in stock price over a period of time. it's starting from August 19th, then 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd, 24th. We can represent this information using what is called a time plot. What is changing here is time. So that's when you use a time plot. The time always goes on the x-axis. Always remember that the time goes on the x-axis. And if you're watching the stock price or anything else, that would go on the y-axis. So we've plotted points for each piece of information we have on the table, and these points are joined by lines, and that's what forms a time plot. Now it's easy to see the variation in the stock price without actually having to look at numbers. You can just follow the dots here that are connected by lines, and that'll show you how the stock price is varying. So August 19th, it was at around 10.01. It went up to about 10.2, then it went up again, hit a peak at 12.01, and then it dropped on August 23rd to 10.09, and then it kept going down until August 25th. So this is an example of how a time plot can be used to represent information. It's easy to read and see how a certain variable changes with time. Now here are instructions on how to construct a time plot on Crunchit. It's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is go to Crunchit, then graphics, then time plot, and in the pop-up dialog box, enter the details. Under parameters, select show both. What that means is you show the points and the lines connecting the points, and that's what forms the time plot. Now, one thing to remember about Crunchit is that if you are solving a problem from the textbook, all the numbers are preloaded into Crunchit. So all you have to do is go to File, under File go to Practice of Statistics in the Life Sciences, that is your textbook, and from there you can pick the problem number from each chapter. So just try this on Crunchit. It's easy to follow and use. Just remember that if you're solving a problem from the textbook, all the data is already entered there, so you don't have to do any data entry. All you have to do is go to the right problem, and all the numbers will show up on the Crunchit work page. So in this part, these are the terms and concepts that we've covered. One is you have to know how to construct a stem plot by hand and using Crunchit. You have to know what the advantages of using a stem plot are. How does it help in showing the shape of the distribution. We also discussed time plots. A time plot always has time on the horizontal axis, and there's always a quantity that we're watching over time, and that quantity sits on the vertical axis.